Peace. This video is about self-discipline. It's made with the intention of helping anyone who has some habits they want to give up or other changes they want to make in their lives have a little easier of a time with it. The reason that I feel like I'm qualified to give advice on this is because over the last year and a half I've given up numerous things in my life, and through trial and error I found out what works and what doesn't work, at least for me. I'm hoping that those things can be helpful for you as well in your journey and whatever you're trying to accomplish. So first of all, I think this is an appropriate time to do the video, being that it's New Year's, because a lot of people are making resolutions and are making the decision to change habits and change aspects of their lives. I'm personally not the biggest fan of New Year's resolutions because I think that there's a stigma attached to it. And an assumption of failure and not going through with it. So personally, my suggestion is either do it a few days before or a few days after or some other time, so you don't, so you can detach from that stigma. But no matter what, it's always good when you're making self improvements and focused on doing that. So if New Year's works for you, then God bless. But I personally like to do it anytime other than New Year's to actually initiate it. Alright, so I'm going to start off by just touching on the fact that there's two choices with any habit that you have. You can either admit that you're dedicated to finding the reasons why you can't give something up, or the reasons why it would be too hard, or you can choose to look for things that will make it easier to succeed. Most of us are trapped in the first category, where we're programmed into thinking that things aren't nearly as possible as they are, and we look for the reasons why they won't work out. I'll give you an example of that. There's someone I've known for a long time. It's an older person who knows that I've given up drinking, and they want to give up drinking as well. And they asked me for tips on how to do that. This individual has been told by the doctors numerous times that they're going to drop dead if they keep on drinking. So they came to me for advice, and as I started giving them advice, they kept coming up with reasons why they weren't going to be able to do it. And the predominant reason was that people that live in the apartment with them are drinkers, and by being around it, it's going to be too hard to give it up. They're not going to be able to. It's too much temptation. It's a valid concern, but they were defeating themselves before they even started. Like that was it. They weren't going to be able to do it no matter what. So I offered the solution of suggesting that they fix up their room with all the comforts and all the things they could possibly want in the living room and the other shared spaces in the apartment, and making that room so nice and so comfortable that when they come into the apartment, they can't wait to get in that room. They look forward to it. They didn't have the issue of feeling the need to be social with the other people in the apartment, because honestly they didn't even get along with them, so that wasn't an issue. But they felt like that was locking themselves in, and they didn't like that. I suggested that that's a much better solution than dying of liver failure, but they were apprehensive about that, and then they kept just jumping back to the fact that they lived with other people who drank, and that was going to unravel them, and there was no getting around that. So first of all, anytime you attach anybody else's actions or decisions to your success or failure, it's over for you. You cannot control what anyone else does, and in making that a factor in whether you do something or not, you're never gonna succeed that way. So that's the first of all. Also, this person clearly, although they wanted help and they want to make changes, they clearly weren't ready because they hadn't addressed their thought patterns yet. And I will eventually help them and I think they will be able to do this, but at this point they're not ready. So I think in that circumstance, the first step is to address the thought patterns and acknowledge them for what they are, and that way you can at least know what the obstacles are that are going to trip you up, and find a way to navigate around them. So that's big. The consciousness of what's going on in your mind, and what you're putting up as an obstacle in front of yourself before you even start is very important. There's people who genuinely want to make changes and just don't believe that it can be done, and that in itself will, of course, prevent it from being done. So the most important thing about that is to catch your thoughts when they veer off in that direction, and become more conscious of what you're thinking and how you're thinking about things. Even the most enlightened people on the face of the earth don't cease to have negative thoughts. The difference between them and us is that they get really good at catching them right away, and changing their focus onto things that are more positive and more likely to help them succeed in whatever they want to do. So that's the key, is being super conscious of what you're thinking about, and whenever you veer off in the negative direction, you catch yourself quicker and quicker over time, and that way you are able to stop the thought before it builds up momentum and is able to manifest itself into your life. So that is very important. Acknowledge the mental conditioning that we are all subject to, some more than others, but all of us have been conditioned since the day we were born to believe in the limitations of our own personal power and our own control over our own lives. I'm not saying there's not outside circumstances that are beyond our control. Of course there is. One thing you always have control over is how you choose to perceive the circumstances, and how you choose to react to them. So if you choose to look for the growth and the silver lining in anything, you will find it. Some of the worst things that ever happened to me in my life, or what I thought were the worst things at the time, ended up being things I would never trade. They caused the most growth and were the most beneficial things that have ever actually happened to me. If you find a way to look for the growth in anything, you will find it. And looking at things from that standpoint will get you where you want to be eventually. So you gotta always stay focused on finding something that you can build upon in any circumstance, no matter how negative it seems. And acknowledge the mental conditioning. So when you're more conscious of it, you can shift it. Don't internalize other people's doubts. A lot of people will tell you things are not possible, and it's not that they don't mean well, but they are so programmed into thinking things are not possible, they project that onto you, and if you internalize that, that will stop you in your tracks. An example of that is I have now quit cigarettes for 1.5 years, but for a few years prior to that, I was quitting on and off, back and forth, and I had numerous people telling me, you always say you're going to quit, you never go through with it, you're constantly putting yourself through the torture of trying to quit and not succeeding. You might as well just give up. What's the point? You should just keep smoking. You're making yourself, you're making it too hard on yourself. And those people had good intentions, and they thought they were saving me some kind of trouble. Thank God I've never been the type of person, even when my thinking wasn't right, to follow other people's beliefs on things over my own. And I always knew deep down that I was going to give up cigarettes. I knew it was something that made me feel disgusting in the long run. Whenever I would give it up, I would feel 1,000,000 times better. And I was dedicated to the fact that one day I was going to give it up, so I didn't listen to them. And every time that I did quit, even if I would go back to it, it built up that resolve, and it gave me insight in what the things are that will trip me up the next time I quit, and help me navigate around those things. And it all built strength, and I grew from each time that I quit, and it got longer and longer. I got really good at getting through the initial 3 days, which is the physical addiction part, and then it was all about challenging the mental conditioning. Um, so always acknowledge that the value in every attempt, and don't defeat yourself if you don't completely quit something right away. There's value in every part of the journey, and if you look at it in that way, you'll get there much quicker. I would suggest that if at all possible, this doesn't apply to everything, it doesn't really apply to cigarettes, but if it applies to whatever habit you're trying to give up, doing things incrementally is very helpful, makes it a lot easier and less overwhelming. My apologies, I have to figure out the settings on this camera. For whatever reason, it cuts off after a certain amount of time, even though there's still space on the memory card. So I'll figure that out as time goes on. I believe I was just finishing up talking about not to be discouraged by slip-ups, and the next thing I want to go into is doing things incrementally if at all possible, if it applies. So I was just speaking about cigarettes. It doesn't really apply to that in my opinion, but something where it does apply is when I gave up drinking. So I gave up drinking because I was the type of person who didn't drink often. I didn't drink all the time, but when I did, I would drink to excess. And I used to black out and spaz on people and just became a person that I didn't like being. And after years of being like that, I finally had to acknowledge it and realize that the best thing for me was to leave it alone. So initially, my intention was just to give up hard liquor. I thought that was the main issue, and that would solve the problems if I gave that up. So that was the first thing I did as far as drinking. And then then I found out at a spot in Queens where a friend of mine, we went and got buckets of Heinekens. I probably had like 45 Heinekens and ended up blacking out. I didn't pass out or anything. I was up doing God knows what. But I wasn't conscious of what was going on. And then all of a sudden, like 8 in the morning, I come back into consciousness, and I'm outside walking around in Queens. I had no recollection of what had happened the prior 4 or 5 hours, and I don't know if anything bad happened, but if you know me when I was drinking, you already know what time it is. So that made me realize that I can black out off beer as well, and that I should probably give that up. That's the second thing I did. So a couple months after the hard liquor, I gave up the beer, and then a couple months after that, I gave up wine and champagne. And doing it incrementally like that made it a lot easier. It took the pressure off of it. It was less overwhelming, and I think that's a great way to go about things if it applies to your particular addiction. Another thing that I can give as an example of that is I gave up eating meat in entirety at this point. But when I started out, the first thing I did was I cut out pork. That was easy because I was never a fan of pork. I didn't eat it much, didn't like it. Then a month or two later, I cut out beef, which, you know, I used to enjoy a burger or a steak once in a while, but it wasn't a big deal to me. It wasn't going to be that hard, so I cut that out next. Then the third thing, maybe a month or two after that, I cut out fish, and that's because to me, I could take it or leave it. It wasn't my favorite thing in the world. Most people do it in the opposite. They'll cut out poultry and then just keep eating fish and cut out fish later if they cut it out at all. For me, as I said, it wasn't something that I felt like I was going to miss that much, so I cut that out third and left poultry for last, because to me, chicken and turkey is what was banging, and that was the thing I knew was going to be harder for me. So I built up my resolve with the first three, got those under my belt, got a little confidence from that, and then I was able to give up the poultry as well. So that is definitely the best way to do things if it applies to your addiction. I know it doesn't apply to everything. If you're a heroin addict, it's probably not a good idea to say, oh, I'm not going to shoot up anymore, I'm just going to sniff dope this month or whatever. I know that that's not necessarily something that applies across the board. But if it does apply to whatever habit you're trying to rid yourself of, try to utilize that. I found it very helpful. Another thing that I recommend is to reward yourself. When you're giving up a habit and you're saving money from not spending money on that habit, take that money and put it towards something else that you really enjoy. Give yourself a treat, a reward, an incentive for whatever you're giving up. And if at all possible, try to make it something that's on the healthier side, just simply because healthy habits nurture each other, encourage each other, and unhealthy things do the same thing. So, for example, when I gave up cigarettes, in the beginning, it was important for me to steer clear of alcohol, coffee, soda, fast food, things of that nature, because the cigarette went very well with those things for me. And if I was drinking a water, that cigarette didn't taste so good after. If I was going to the gym, that cigarette tasted like shit, made me feel terrible about myself. So, whatever you do, choose to reward yourself. Try to make it something on the healthier side. I'm not saying you can't have something that you enjoy and doesn't have to be super healthy, but just try to keep that in mind, that things tend to stay in categories. So whatever it is that you are trying to get rid of, don't lean towards things that are in that same sort of realm. Try to lean towards healthier things that will encourage you to make healthier choices, if at all possible. And that's about it for right now. I want you all to know you can feel free to hit me up if you need any advice, if you need encouragement, support, and I definitely will respond. I hope this video has been helpful in some way and can help you through whatever you're trying to conquer. And I will be making more videos in the near future. Whatever you're watching this on, there should be my social media information under it. You can like and subscribe and stay tuned. As I said, I will be putting up more videos. They will all be with the intention of helping people grow and improve themselves. So that's about it for now. I appreciate you watching. I wish you all the best. Peace and love.